Nothing's wrong, your life is fine, there's no crisis, nothing bad is happening, and yet you feel anxious. The anxiety shows up often, even when everything seems to be going okay, and then suddenly, you don't feel so okay anymore. And that's the part no one really explains. Why anxiety shows up when there's no clear reason for it. So if you've ever felt like this, like something's off but you can't explain why, this isn't as random as you might think. And this is where it gets confusing. This kind of anxiety doesn't come from what's happening around you. It comes from what your mind is doing when nothing is really happening, because silence is difficult for a nervous system that has learned to stay alert. Most people think anxiety always needs a visible cause, a problem, a threat, a stressful event. But some forms of anxiety are quieter than that, more internal, more automatic. You wake up uneasy. You feel restless while relaxing. You check your phone for no reason. You feel an edge emotionally during completely normal moments. And eventually you start asking yourself, what's wrong with me? But the deeper truth is usually this: nothing is wrong with you. Your nervous system may simply no longer trust stillness. And in a world that constantly trains the brain to anticipate, react, compare, monitor, and prepare, calm can start to feel unfamiliar. And when something feels unfamiliar, the mind instinctively searches for a reason. That's why anxiety sometimes appears in peaceful moments. Not because peacefulness created the anxiety, but because your brain finally became quiet enough for underlying tension to surface. And once you understand this, something important changes. You stop treating anxiety like evidence that there must be something wrong with your life, and you start seeing it as information. Not proof that something terrible is happening, but proof that your nervous system has been carrying more than you realized. And if any of this feels familiar, stay with me. I've linked a calming emotional reset video at the end to help you gently slow down and reconnect with a sense of calm. One of the strangest things about modern anxiety is that people can feel mentally exhausted without understanding why. Because the exhaustion isn't always physical. It's the cost of constantly anticipating what comes next. Your brain spends enormous amounts of energy trying to anticipate future outcomes. What if they don't text back? What if I forgot something? Am I falling behind? What if something goes wrong later? The mind becomes a forecasting machine, constantly scanning, constantly preparing, and eventually the body begins living in the emotional atmosphere of problems that haven't even happened. This is one reason anxiety can appear during ordinary moments. Your body may physically be resting while your mind is still emotionally preparing for impact. And the digital world quietly intensifies this. Every notification teaches the brain interruption. Every refresh teaches anticipation. Every scroll trains the mind to keep searching. Without realizing it, many people spend years conditioning themselves into a state of low-grade hypervigilance. The pace of modern-day living rarely allows the nervous system to fully settle. Even silence has changed. Most people no longer experience true stillness. There's usually background stimulation like music playing, notifications popping up, and the constant scrolling. And then there are the ever-present racing thoughts. So when the stimulation finally disappears, the nervous system doesn't always feel relief. Sometimes it feels unsettled. And that's the paradox. Stillness, the very thing people desperately need, can initially feel uncomfortable when the brain has adapted to constant input, which means anxiety isn't always created by chaos. Sometimes it's revealed in the absence of distraction. That's why certain moments feel unexpectedly heavy, like driving home alone, lying in bed, sitting quietly after a long day, walking alone without headphones. The external world becomes quiet, and suddenly your internal world becomes loud. And this often creates another layer of anxiety. People become anxious about the fact that they're feeling anxious. They start monitoring themselves. Why do I feel like this? Why can't I relax? But anxiety grows stronger when the mind starts treating discomfort like a sign that something serious must be going on. The more we fear anxious feelings, the more power we give them. which means the goal isn't to never feel anxiety. It's to stop relating to every anxious feeling as proof that something terrible is happening. Sometimes anxiety isn't a warning, it's simply a nervous system that has been carrying tension for too long. Not all anxiety comes from fear. Sometimes it comes from emotional backlog, feelings that were postponed, stress that was minimized, pressure that was normalized. Many people become highly skilled at functioning while emotionally disconnected from themselves. They keep moving, working, distracting, coping, and because they continue functioning externally, they assume they're handling everything internally. But the nervous system keeps records, not in sentences, but in sensations. Tight shoulders, jaw tension, restlessness, a knot in your stomach, difficulty relaxing, and the constant feeling that something unresolved is sitting beneath the surface. The mind is incredibly adaptive and can suppress emotional overwhelm temporarily in order to survive difficult periods. But suppressed emotion does not disappear. It usually waits. And when life finally becomes quieter, those unprocessed emotions sometimes begin surfacing as anxiety. This is why some people become more anxious after stressful periods end, not during, after. Because survival mode delays emotional processing. During stress, the brain prioritizes functioning. After stress, the body is finally allowed to feel what it has been carrying, and that can be deeply confusing. People think, I got through the hard part, so why do I suddenly feel worse? That's because the nervous system often processes reality after the emergency has passed. And this is why emotional avoidance can unintentionally increase anxiety over time. When difficult emotions are repeatedly numbed through constant productivity, stimulation, or distraction, the nervous system never fully completes emotional cycles. The feelings remain unfinished, and unfinished emotions tend to return indirectly as tension, restlessness, mental overactivity, and emotional fatigue. Not because there's something wrong with you, but because your mind and body are still trying to process what they've been carrying. This doesn't mean you need to analyze every feeling endlessly. Sometimes anxiety softens when difficult emotions are finally acknowledged, not in dramatic ways, just quietly admitting, I think I've been carrying more stress than I realized. I think I've been surviving for so long that calm feels unfamiliar now. Those moments matter, because naming emotional reality reduces the nervous system's need to communicate through constant tension. And strangely, being emotionally honest with yourself can feel safer to the nervous system than endlessly pretending you're unaffected. One of the most exhausting parts of anxiety is how quickly the mind begins inventing explanations for the discomfort you're feeling. You feel uneasy, and within seconds the brain starts searching. Maybe it's my future, maybe it's my relationship, maybe it's my health, maybe something bad is about to happen. This happens because the brain prefers certainty, even painful certainty, over unresolved emotional ambiguity. An unexplained feeling makes the nervous system uncomfortable, so the mind tries to attach the feeling to a story, and once it finds a story, it tends to loop it. This is why anxiety often creates repetitive thought cycles. The brain believes that if it can think enough, prepare enough, analyze enough, or predict enough, it can finally create safety. But excessive mental monitoring rarely creates calm. It usually creates more internal noise. And over time, many people unknowingly become trapped inside what we could call the false alarm loop. An uncomfortable feeling appears. The brain assumes there is something wrong. The body reacts. The reaction feels convincing, and anxiety begins creating evidence for itself. What started as an uncomfortable feeling now feels like proof, and the cycle continues. The body isn't only reacting to life anymore, it's reacting to its own reactions. This is why reassurance often stops working after a while, because anxiety isn't always rooted in logic, it's rooted in the nervous system's need for safety, and those are not the same thing. You can logically know everything is okay and still feel internally unsettled. That disconnect frustrates many people. But it's incredibly human, since the nervous system responds more to a sense of safety than to logic alone. This means healing anxiety is not only about changing thoughts, it's also about changing your relationship to the feelings themselves. Instead of immediately asking, "How do I make this feeling disappear?" a calmer question becomes, "Can I experience this feeling without treating it like proof of danger?" That question changes everything, because the moment anxiety is no longer interpreted as catastrophic, the nervous system often stops escalating. Not instantly, not perfectly, but gradually. The body begins learning, "This feeling is uncomfortable, but I am still safe." And for many people, that is the beginning of emotional regulation, not controlling every feeling, but reducing the fear surrounding it. There's another layer to this that people rarely talk about. Some nervous systems become so adapted to stress that calm itself begins feeling unfamiliar, and unfamiliarity can create tension. If you've spent years constantly solving problems, constantly preparing for what might go wrong next, then stillness may not immediately register as safety. It may register as uncertainty. The body thinks, "Why do I suddenly feel uneasy? Did I forget something? Shouldn't I be preparing for something?" This is especially common in people who became emotionally responsible very early in life, people who learned to monitor environments carefully, people who became highly sensitive to emotional shifts, people who unconsciously associated relaxation with vulnerability. For them, anxiety is not always fear of catastrophe. Sometimes it's difficulty trusting calm, and this can create strange emotional patterns. You finally get a peaceful weekend and suddenly feel restless. You complete an important task and immediately start worrying about the next thing. You experience a good moment and your mind interrupts it by imagining loss. Not because you want to suffer, but because the nervous system has learned vigilance more deeply than rest. This is why some people feel strangely uncomfortable when they finally slow down. The nervous system doesn't always settle the moment life becomes quiet. The body and mind have momentum, and slowing that momentum takes time. Real emotional rest is not simply the absence of work. It's gradually learning that calm and quiet are safe places to be. And becoming comfortable with calm doesn't happen through force. It happens through repetition. Small moments where the nervous system experiences calm without feeling the need to brace for what comes next. Moments where you sit quietly without immediately escaping into stimulation. Moments where you notice anxiety without instantly panicking about it. Moments where you allow rest without earning it through exhaustion first. These experiences slowly retrain the nervous system. Not through pressure, through consistency. And this matters because many people secretly believe they need to eliminate anxiety completely before they can feel peaceful. But emotional regulation is often less dramatic than that. Sometimes it simply looks like feeling anxiety and no longer building an entire identity around it. Feeling uncertainty and still remaining connected to the present moment. Feeling discomfort without needing to panic about what it means. That is your nervous system healing, quietly, gradually. When anxiety appears without a clear reason, the mind usually tries to solve it mentally. But many forms of anxiety cannot be fully resolved through more thinking, because overthinking is often part of the activation itself. So instead of immediately trying to figure everything out, there's a different approach. An emotionally intelligent response is returning to the present moment. Not positive thinking, not forced calm, not pretending everything feels okay. Just returning attention gently back to what is actually happening right now. Because anxiety often pulls the mind into imagined futures, potential problems, hypothetical scenarios, emotional forecasting. The present moment, meanwhile, is usually quieter than the mind's predictions about it. So when anxiety rises, try asking, what is physically happening right now, in this exact moment. Not what I'm imagining, not tomorrow, not later, not hypothetically. What is actually happening now? You may simply notice you're sitting safely in a room, breathing, hearing the sounds around you, feeling some tension in your body, but not currently in danger. This doesn't erase anxiety instantly, but it interrupts escalation. The body responds best to your present reality, and over time, repeatedly returning attention to the present teaches the nervous system something powerful. Not every feeling requires a full emergency response. Another important part of this response is reducing unnecessary nervous system stimulation. Less doom scrolling, less constant checking, less emotional overload disguised as entertainment, not as punishment, but as self-care. Sometimes the anxious brain needs less input, because the nervous system absorbs more than people realize. And finally, perhaps the most important reminder of all is that you do not need to become emotionally perfect to deserve peace. You do not need to eliminate every anxious thought. You do not need to win a battle against your own mind. Often the deepest shift happens when the relationship with anxiety becomes less adversarial, more compassionate, more understanding, less afraid. Because feeling anxious doesn't mean you're weak. It may simply mean you're overextended, emotionally overstimulated, and deeply unaccustomed to true rest. That's different, and understanding that difference changes the way you speak to yourself. So if you've been feeling anxious lately, even when life seems objectively okay, this does not automatically mean something is wrong with you. Sometimes your anxiety may simply be your body responding to the unfamiliar quiet that appears when life finally slows down. Often anxiety becomes less frightening once you understand where it might be coming from. Because understanding creates space. Space to stop second-guessing your feelings. Space to stop treating every uncomfortable feeling like something you need to fear. Space to finally approach your inner world with less judgment, because peace is not the absence of all anxious feelings. Peace is learning that you can experience those feelings without losing yourself inside them. So tonight, or tomorrow morning, or the next quiet moment you have, try not to immediately run from the stillness. Just notice what happens. Notice the urge to check, to distract, to prepare, or to mentally escape. And instead of criticizing yourself for it, simply recognize it and gently return to the present moment. And then begin to find comfort in the calm again. If anxiety has been affecting your daily life more than you'd like, please remember that you don't have to navigate it alone. I've included some support resources in the description below for anyone who may find them helpful. If you'd like to keep exploring emotional intelligence in a modern world, subscribe to the EI Code. We don't just decode behavior, we decode the emotions behind it, so you can live your best life with greater awareness, depth, and peace. That's emotional intelligence, and it starts with you. If you want to go deeper or apply this in your own life, I've linked a few helpful resources related to this topic in the description below. Now, there's another video on your screen that looks at a different emotional challenge shaped by the digital world.